Imagine waking up tomorrow to breaking news that changes everything you thought you knew about faith, history, and human civilization. Picture archaeologists in Jerusalem, their hands trembling as they uncover splinters of wood that once held the most famous figure in human history. The carbon dating results flash across laboratory screens. 33 AD, 1st century Palestine, microscopic traces of human blood embedded in the grain. What would happen if the actual cross of Jesus Christ was discovered today, in our digital age of skepticism and instant global communication? Welcome to our channel, where we explore forbidden questions and hidden truths of history, religion, and the unknown. If you love journeys that challenge what you thought you knew, make sure to join us, because today's story may change the way you see everything. The year is 33 AD, and on a hill outside Jerusalem called Golgotha, 3 wooden crosses pierce the sky against a darkening afternoon. But this isn't just another execution day in the Roman Empire. This is the moment that would split human history into before and after, and the wood that bears this moment is about to vanish into legend for nearly 2,000 years. Chapter 1. The Sacred Wood. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty streets of Jerusalem as Roman soldiers dragged 3 wooden beams through the city gates. These weren't ordinary pieces of timber. Each cross had been carefully selected from sturdy olive wood, shaped by skilled craftsmen who understood the grim science of crucifixion. The Romans had perfected this method of execution over centuries, designed not just to kill, but to humiliate and terrorize anyone who dared challenge their authority. On this particular Friday, one of those crosses would bear a weight far beyond its physical capacity. As Jesus of Nazareth struggled under the horizontal beam, blood from his beaten body seeped into the wood grain, creating microscopic patterns that would remain hidden for millennia. The vertical post, already planted in the rocky ground of Golgotha, had witnessed countless executions before. But something about this day felt different to the small crowd of followers who watched in horror. What made this cross special wasn't just who hung upon it, but what happened next. According to the Gospel accounts, darkness fell over the land at noon. The earth shook, the temple veil tore in two, and when Jesus breathed his last, the centurion standing guard declared something that would echo through history. Truly, this man was the Son of God. In that moment, an ordinary Roman execution device became the most sacred object in human civilization. But where did the cross go after that Friday afternoon? Roman law was clear about crucifixion crosses. They were typically broken down and reused, the wood recycled for other construction projects, or simply burned for fuel. The idea that this particular cross might survive was almost impossible. Yet for early Christians, the cross immediately became more than a memory. It became a symbol of hope, sacrifice, and divine love that would inspire martyrs, convert emperors, and launch a global faith. Archaeological evidence from 1st century Palestine tells us that crosses were made from whatever sturdy wood was available. Olive trees were common, but so were oak, pine, and imported timber from Lebanon. The craftsmanship was brutal but effective, designed to support a human body for hours or even days of agony. Each nail hole, each stress mark in the wood, told a story of Roman engineering applied to the cruelest possible purpose. Chapter 2. Helena's Quest. 3 centuries later, a determined woman in her 70s embarked on the most famous archaeological expedition in Christian history. Helena, mother of Emperor Constantine, arrived in Jerusalem in 326 AD. with unlimited imperial resources and an unshakable belief that the true cross could be found. Her son had just legalized Christianity throughout the Roman Empire, but legitimacy required relics, physical proof of the faith that was rapidly transforming their world. Helena's quest wasn't just personal devotion, it was political genius. Constantine needed to unite his diverse empire under a common faith, and what better way than to literally unearth Christianity's most sacred artifact? The aging empress interviewed local Christians, consulted ancient texts, and followed every lead about the location of Golgotha. Her excavation teams dug systematically through centuries of debris and construction that had buried the original crucifixion site. The discovery came after months of searching. Beneath a Roman temple dedicated to Venus, Helena's workers uncovered not one cross, but 3. According to the legend preserved by church historians, the empress faced an impossible challenge. How could anyone identify which cross had held Jesus? The solution came through what believers called divine intervention. Each cross was tested by touching it to a dying woman. 2 crosses produced no effect, but the 3rd supposedly healed her instantly. Helena's discovery sent shockwaves through the Christian world. Pilgrims began flocking to Jerusalem to see and touch the true cross. Pieces were carefully removed and distributed to churches across the empire, each fragment becoming a precious relic, capable of inspiring faith and performing miracles. The wood was said to multiply miraculously, allowing countless churches to possess authentic pieces without diminishing the original. But scholars have always questioned Helena's find. Was it genuine archaeological discovery or elaborate imperial theatre? Did Constantine's mother really uncover the cross of Christ? Or did political necessity create a convenient relic? The true cross became one of Christianity's most venerated artifacts, inspiring centuries of pilgrimage, crusades, and devotion. Yet its authenticity remained a matter of faith rather than verifiable fact, a mystery that would persist until our modern age of digital verification and scientific analysis. Chapter 3: The Moment Everything Changes. Dr. Sarah Chen never expected her routine archaeological survey to rewrite human history. The MIT-trained archaeologist was leading a standard documentation project in East Jerusalem when her ground-penetrating radar detected an anomaly beneath a construction site. The readings showed a perfectly preserved underground chamber, sealed for nearly 2 millennia, and somehow missed by countless previous excavations in the area. What happened next unfolded like a thriller movie, except the stakes were infinitely higher than any Hollywood plot. Chen's team used fiber optic cameras to peer into the sealed chamber before breaking through. The images that appeared on their monitors defied explanation. Wooden beams arranged in a cross pattern, wrapped in ancient linen, and preserved in conditions that should have been impossible in Jerusalem's climate. The initial carbon dating results arrived via secure email at 3:47 a.m. local time. The lab technician's hands trembled as she typed the report. Organic material consistent with 1st century Palestinian olive wood, human blood proteins embedded throughout the grain structure, and microscopic evidence of iron nail penetration. But the truly shocking discovery came from the DNA analysis. The blood traces contained genetic markers consistent with Middle Eastern Jewish populations from the 1st century AD. Chen immediately implemented emergency security protocols, but in the age of smartphones and social media, secrets don't last long. Within hours, leaked photos and videos began appearing on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. The footage showed what appeared to be the actual cross of Jesus Christ, complete with dark stains that could only be blood and wear patterns consistent with Roman crucifixion techniques. Religious leaders around the world received urgent phone calls in the middle of the night. The Vatican's Secretary of State was awakened at 2 a.m. Rome time with news that would require immediate papal consultation. In Istanbul, the Ecumenical Patriarch of Constantinople convened an emergency synod. Protestant denominational headquarters scrambled to craft official responses to media inquiries that were already flooding their phone lines. But this wasn't just a religious story anymore. The discovery occurred in one of the world's most politically sensitive locations, where every archaeological find carries potential diplomatic consequences. Israeli antiquities authorities immediately sealed the site and declared the discovery a matter of national heritage. Palestinian representatives countered with their own claims to Jerusalem's Christian history. The cross that once united early believers was already dividing modern political factions. Chapter 4: Digital Age Revelation. The leaked footage went viral faster than any religious content in internet history. Within 6 hours, #TrueCrossFound was trending globally across all major social media platforms. The original TikTok video, posted by a construction worker who managed to film through a gap in the security barriers, garnered over 50 million views before authorities could have it removed. But by then, thousands of copies were already circulating through encrypted messaging apps and blockchain-based storage systems. Real-time fact-checkers worked frantically to verify the authenticity of the viral content. Reverse image searches found no previous instances of the photographs, eliminating the possibility of recycled hoax material. Metadata analysis confirmed the images were taken at the Jerusalem coordinates claimed by the archaeological team. Even the most sophisticated deepfake detection algorithms couldn't identify any evidence of digital manipulation in the footage. Twitter became a battleground of competing interpretations within minutes of the story breaking. Biblical scholars, archaeologists, historians, and armchair experts engaged in heated debates about carbon dating accuracy, crucifixion practices, and the probability of wooden artifacts surviving 2 millennia in Palestinian soil. Hashtags like #FaithVsScience and #ArchaeologyMatters began trending alongside more skeptical tags like #ShowMeProof and #ReligiousHoax. The financial markets reacted with unprecedented volatility. Cryptocurrency designed for religious organizations spiked by 400% in early trading. Tourism stocks for Middle Eastern destinations experienced wild swings as investors tried to predict whether the discovery would boost or destabilize regional pilgrimage industries. Even tech stocks fluctuated as analysts debated whether authentication technologies might benefit from increased demand for relic verification services. YouTube channels dedicated to biblical archaeology saw subscriber counts explode as millions of viewers desperately sought expert analysis of the breaking news. Live streams featuring hastily assembled panels of religious scholars and scientists drew audiences typically reserved for major sporting events. Comment sections became theological battlegrounds where believers and skeptics clashed over the implications of physical evidence for spiritual faith. But perhaps most significantly, the story demonstrated how religious revelation works differently in the digital age. Instead of spreading slowly through institutional channels over months or years, news of humanity's most important archaeological discovery circulated globally within hours. Believers and skeptics alike had immediate access to the same evidence, the same expert opinions, and the same uncertainties. The cross discovery wasn't just challenging religious assumptions, it was revealing how faith itself operates in an interconnected, instantly informed world. Chapter 5: The Authentication Wars. The battle for scientific credibility began before the sun rose over Jerusalem. Dr. Chen found herself at the center of an international custody dispute that made historical artifact controversies look simple by comparison. The Israeli Antiquities Authority, the Vatican's Pontifical Commission for Sacred Archaeology, and UNESCO's World Heritage Committee all claimed jurisdiction over what might be humanity's most significant archaeological discovery. Harvard's Department of Near Eastern Languages and Civilizations assembled an emergency authentication team within 48 hours, flying experts to Jerusalem on a chartered flight funded by an anonymous billionaire donor. Oxford University's Faculty of Theology countered with their own international consortium, backed by the Church of England and including representatives from major Christian denominations worldwide. Meanwhile, the Smithsonian Institution invoked its partnership agreements with the Israeli government to demand immediate access for American researchers. The Vatican's response was swift and unprecedented. Cardinal Alessandro Toretti, prefect of the Congregation for the Causes of Saints, arrived in Jerusalem with a team of church historians, theologians, and surprisingly, some of the world's leading forensic scientists. The Catholic Church, having learned from centuries of relic authentication controversies, was determined to apply the most rigorous scientific methods available to verify or debunk the discovery. Competing laboratories began publishing preliminary analyses based on microscopic samples obtained through various official and unofficial channels. The Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig released DNA sequencing results that confirmed Middle Eastern genetic markers consistent with first-century Jewish populations. MIT's Laboratory for Nuclear Science published radiocarbon dating that placed the wood between 20 and 50 AD, with margins of error that perfectly bracketed the traditional crucifixion date. But authentication wasn't just about science anymore. Legal teams representing different religious institutions began filing injunctions and custody claims in international courts. The complexity was staggering. Israeli civil law, Vatican canon law, UNESCO heritage protocols, and the rights of Palestinian Christian communities all created overlapping and sometimes contradictory legal frameworks. Who owned the cross? Who had the authority to study it? And perhaps most importantly, who had the right to declare it authentic or fraudulent? Underground networks of relic hunters, religious extremists, and black market antiquities dealers began planning increasingly elaborate schemes to steal or photograph the cross. Israeli security services intercepted communications suggesting that several international criminal organizations viewed the cross as the ultimate heist target, worth potentially billions of dollars to the right buyer or capable of funding terrorist operations if held for ransom. Chapter 6: Fractured Christianity. The cross discovery exposed theological fault lines within Christianity that many believers didn't even realize existed. For Catholics, the find seemed to validate centuries of relic veneration and the Church's historical claims about preserving authentic artifacts from Christ's life. Pope Francis issued a carefully worded statement acknowledging the discovery while emphasizing that Christian faith doesn't depend on physical evidence, but millions of Catholics saw the cross as divine confirmation of their traditional beliefs. Protestant reactions varied dramatically across denominational lines. Lutheran churches, with their emphasis on grace through faith alone, struggled to incorporate physical evidence into theological frameworks that had long rejected the necessity of relics. Baptist conventions held emergency meetings to address whether the cross discovery conflicted with Protestant principles about the sufficiency of Scripture. Some Baptist leaders worried that veneration of the physical cross might lead believers away from the spiritual significance of Christ's sacrifice. Evangelical communities experienced perhaps the most complex responses to the discovery. Many evangelical churches had spent decades criticizing Catholic relic veneration as unbiblical superstition. But faced with potential scientific proof of Christianity's central event, some evangelical leaders found themselves reconsidering their positions on physical evidence and faith. Others doubled down on their conviction that true faith requires no material proof, arguing that the cross discovery might actually be a test of spiritual versus physical dependence. Pentecostal and charismatic churches saw opportunities for renewed emphasis on miraculous interventions in the modern world. If God could preserve the true cross for nearly 2,000 years and reveal it in the digital age, what other miracles might be possible? Healing services and prophecy conferences began incorporating the cross discovery into their theological frameworks, with some charismatic leaders claiming they had received divine revelations about the artifact's spiritual powers. Orthodox Christianity faced unique challenges since Eastern Orthodox traditions had always maintained strong relic veneration practices while remaining separate from Vatican authority. The Ecumenical Patriarch of Constantinople called for Orthodox unity in studying the cross, but centuries-old divisions between different Orthodox churches complicated coordinated responses. Russian Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, and other national churches each claimed historical authority over interpreting the discovery's significance. The most painful divisions emerged within individual congregations and families. Lifelong churchgoers found their personal faith either dramatically strengthened or unexpectedly shaken by the existence of physical evidence. Some believers felt that needing proof demonstrated weak faith, while others saw the discovery as God's gift to a skeptical world. Churches that had worshipped together for generations suddenly found themselves split over fundamental questions about the relationship between faith and evidence. Chapter 7: The Islamic Perspective. The cross discovery created unexpected opportunities for Islamic-Christian dialogue, while simultaneously highlighting fundamental theological differences about the crucifixion itself. Islamic scholars immediately pointed to Quranic verses suggesting that Jesus was not actually crucified, but that it was made to appear so to his enemies. If the cross were authentic, some Muslim theologians argued, it might actually prove Islamic teachings about the crucifixion being an illusion rather than validating Christian beliefs about Jesus' death. Dr. Amina Hassan, a prominent Islamic historian at Al-Azhar University in Cairo, published a widely circulated analysis suggesting that the cross could represent evidence of Roman persecution of early Muslims who followed Jesus' teachings. Her interpretation, while controversial within both Islamic and Christian communities, offered a framework for Muslims to acknowledge the cross's historical significance without accepting Christian theological claims about divine sacrifice and resurrection. The discovery prompted renewed scholarly attention to Islamic texts about Jesus, known in Arabic as Isa ibn Maryam. Sufi mystics, who had long maintained devotional practices centered on Jesus as a spiritual master, found in the cross discovery validation of their emphasis on Jesus' role as a guide to divine love. Some Sufi orders began organizing interfaith meditation sessions focused on the cross as a symbol of surrender to divine will, attracting curious Christians and Muslims alike. In Jerusalem, where Muslim, Christian, and Jewish communities have coexisted for centuries despite periodic tensions, the cross discovery initially increased interfaith cooperation as local religious leaders recognized the need for unified responses to international media attention. The Supreme Muslim Council worked with Christian patriarchs to ensure that archaeological work proceeded respectfully and that the religious sensitivities of all communities were honored. However, more conservative Islamic voices expressed concern that Christian excitement over the cross discovery might lead to increased missionary activities in Muslim-majority countries. Several Islamic organizations issued statements reminding Muslims that while Jesus is revered as a prophet in Islam, the Christian interpretation of his crucifixion and resurrection remains incompatible with Islamic teachings. They worried that scientific validation of the cross's authenticity might be used to challenge fundamental Islamic beliefs about Jesus' fate. The most interesting responses came from Muslim academics and scientists who participated in the authentication process. Their involvement in carbon dating, DNA analysis, and historical research demonstrated that scientific inquiry could proceed alongside religious conviction. Some Muslim researchers noted that proving the cross's authenticity might actually support Islamic teachings by confirming that someone was indeed crucified at the time and place described in Christian accounts, even if Islamic theology maintains it wasn't actually Jesus who died. Chapter 8: Jewish Historical Reckoning. The discovery of the cross in Jerusalem forced the Jewish community to confront complex historical and emotional realities about the crucifixion of Jesus, an event that had influenced Jewish-Christian relations for nearly 2 millennia. For many Jews, the cross represented centuries of persecution, justified by false accusations of collective guilt for Jesus' death. Now, archaeological evidence was confirming that a crucifixion had indeed occurred in their ancestral city, requiring careful navigation between historical acknowledgement and religious sensitivity. Rabbi Dr. Michael Goldstein, a prominent historian at Hebrew University, published a thoughtful response emphasizing that the cross discovery, if authentic, simply confirmed what historians already knew, that Jesus was a first-century Jewish teacher who was executed by Roman authorities along with countless other Jews during the occupation of Palestine. His analysis stressed that crucifixion was a Roman punishment, not a Jewish one, and that the cross represented Roman brutality rather than Jewish responsibility. Israeli archaeological authorities found themselves managing not just a scientific discovery, but a potential catalyst for renewed anti-Semitic interpretations of the crucifixion. Government officials worked closely with Jewish religious leaders to ensure that public discussions of the cross emphasized historical context rather than religious blame. They particularly stressed that first-century Judaism was diverse, with many Jewish groups, including Jesus' early followers, who would later become Christians. Orthodox Jewish scholars engaged seriously with the historical implications while maintaining their theological positions about Jesus' identity. Some noted that if the cross were authentic, it might actually support Jewish teachings about the consequences of messianic claims during the Roman period. Others focused on the discovery's implications for understanding first-century Jewish life in Jerusalem, viewing it as an artifact of Jewish history rather than primarily a Christian relic. The discovery also prompted reflection within Israel's modern multicultural society. Jewish Israelis, who had grown up learning about the Holocaust and centuries of Christian persecution, found themselves processing archaeological evidence of Christianity's foundational event discovered in their own country. Some saw opportunities for healing historical wounds through shared scholarly inquiry, while others worried about the cross becoming a focal point for Christian missionary activities. Perhaps most significantly, Messianic Jewish communities saw the cross discovery as profound validation of their belief that Jesus was indeed the Jewish Messiah. These communities, often viewed with suspicion by both traditional Jewish and Christian groups, found themselves at the center of discussions about how Jewish identity and Christian faith might be reconciled in light of physical evidence supporting the crucifixion narrative. Chapter 9: Eastern Religions. React. Buddhist teachers worldwide offered unique perspectives on the cross discovery that transcended the monotheistic debates dominating Western responses. The Dalai Lama issued a statement noting that if authentic, the cross represented a profound artifact of human suffering and compassion, themes central to Buddhist understanding regardless of specific theological interpretations. He suggested that the cross could serve as a meditation object for contemplating the universal nature of suffering and the possibility of liberation through compassionate sacrifice. Hindu scholars drew parallels between the crucifixion and ancient concepts of divine avatars sacrificing themselves for humanity's welfare. Dr. Priya Sharma, a professor of comparative religion at Jawaharlal Nehru University, published an analysis comparing the cross to sacred objects in Hindu tradition that embody divine presence through association with enlightened beings. Her work suggested that the cross's significance might transcend Christian theology to represent universal principles of divine love manifesting through physical reality. Sikh communities emphasize the cross's message of selfless service, connecting Jesus' sacrifice to their own tradition's emphasis on seva, or selfless service to others. The Golden Temple in Amritsar hosted interfaith discussions about how the cross discovery might inspire renewed commitment to serving humanity regardless of religious boundaries. Sikh scholars noted similarities between Jesus' willingness to die for others and the martyrdom traditions within Sikhism. Jain teachers, with their emphasis on non-violence and compassion for all living beings, offered meditations on the cross as a symbol of the violence that enlightened beings endure while maintaining perfect compassion for their persecutors. They suggested that the cross represented the ultimate expression of ahimsa, or non-violence, through Jesus' refusal to respond to violence with violence. New Age and syncretic spiritual movements quickly incorporated the cross discovery into their eclectic frameworks, seeing it as validation of their beliefs about the interconnectedness of all spiritual traditions. Crystal healers claimed the cross emitted unique energy signatures, while meditation teachers developed visualization practices centered on the cross as a focal point for universal love and healing. The most intriguing responses came from Tibetan Buddhist monks who had studied Christian mysticism and found deep similarities between crucifixion symbolism and tantric practices involving the transformation of suffering into enlightenment. Some suggested that the cross discovery provided an opportunity for Christians and Buddhists to explore their shared understanding of how spiritual realization often requires embracing rather than avoiding difficult experiences. Chapter 10: Atheist and Secular Challenges. The secular response to the cross discovery was as divided as the religious reactions, but along different lines. Prominent atheist intellectuals like Richard Dawkins acknowledged that archaeological evidence of Jesus' historical existence didn't validate supernatural claims about resurrection or divinity. They argued that finding the cross simply confirmed what most historians already accepted, that Jesus was a real person who was executed by Romans, nothing more. The American Humanist Association issued a carefully worded statement emphasizing that physical evidence of crucifixion didn't constitute proof of miraculous resurrection or divine intervention. They called for rigorous scientific analysis while cautioning against interpreting archaeological discoveries through religious rather than historical frameworks. Their position stressed that confirming Jesus' death by crucifixion actually made claims about his resurrection more, not less, scientifically implausible. University philosophy departments became battlegrounds for debates about the relationship between historical evidence and religious faith. Atheist philosophers argued that believers' excitement over the cross discovery revealed their underlying doubt about their faith's truth claims. If religious faith were truly sufficient, they reasoned, believers wouldn't need physical evidence to validate their beliefs. The discovery, they suggested, might actually weaken rather than strengthen religious conviction by demonstrating believers' dependence on material proof. Scientific skepticism organizations demanded access to the cross for independent analysis by researchers without religious affiliations. They worried that Christian and Jewish scientists might unconsciously bias their research toward confirming the artifact's authenticity. The James Randi Educational Foundation offered funding for rigorous testing protocols designed to eliminate wishful thinking and confirmation bias from the authentication process. Secular archaeologists emphasize that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that carbon dating and DNA analysis, while impressive, still left room for alternative explanations. They noted that first-century crucifixion victims were numerous, and that proving the wood dated to the right period and contained human blood didn't definitively prove it was Jesus' cross, rather than someone else's execution device. However, some atheist scholars found themselves unexpectedly moved by the discovery's human dimensions. Even without accepting supernatural claims, they recognized the cross as a powerful artifact representing the consequences of challenging political and religious authority. Some suggested that the cross, if authentic, deserved preservation and study as a testament to human courage in the face of persecution, regardless of one's beliefs about Jesus' divine nature. Chapter 11: The Gnostic Gospels Connection. The cross discovery prompted renewed scholarly attention to early Christian texts that had been excluded from the biblical canon, particularly the Gnostic Gospels discovered at Nag Hammadi in Egypt. These alternative early Christian writings offered different perspectives on Jesus' crucifixion that suddenly seemed relevant to authenticating and interpreting the archaeological find. The Gospel of Thomas, which focuses on Jesus' teachings rather than his death and resurrection, contains sayings that some scholars interpreted as references to the cross's spiritual rather than physical significance. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a specialist in early Christian literature at Princeton Theological Seminary, noted that if the physical cross had been preserved, it might validate Gnostic teachings about the importance of hidden knowledge and the survival of sacred objects through divine intervention. The Gospel of Philip's discussions of Jesus' relationship with Mary Magdalene gained new attention as researchers wondered whether alternative Gospels might contain historical details about the crucifixion that weren't preserved in canonical accounts. Some scholars began searching Gnostic texts for clues about what happened to the cross after the crucifixion, looking for references to followers preserving or hiding Jesus' execution device. Particularly intriguing was the Gospel of Peter's unique account of the crucifixion, which describes Jesus being taken up while still on the cross, leading some early Christians to believe he didn't actually die. If the discovered cross showed evidence of someone being removed while still alive, it might support alternative early Christian interpretations of the crucifixion narrative that differed from later Orthodox teachings. The Apocalypse of Peter's vivid descriptions of Jesus' suffering included details about the cross's appearance and construction that weren't found in canonical Gospels. Researchers began comparing these descriptions with the physical characteristics of the discovered artifact, looking for correspondences that might validate both the cross's authenticity and the historical value of non-canonical early Christian texts. Coptic Christian communities in Egypt, who had preserved many Gnostic texts through centuries of persecution, saw the cross discovery as validation of their ancestors' commitment to protecting alternative Christian traditions. Some Coptic scholars suggested that their manuscripts might contain additional clues about the cross's history between the crucifixion and Helena's supposed discovery in the 4th century. The most controversial connection involved texts describing the cross's mystical properties and healing powers. While mainstream archaeologists focused on authentication through scientific methods, some researchers wondered whether Gnostic descriptions of the cross's spiritual energy might be tested through modern bioenergy measurement techniques, potentially bridging ancient mystical claims with contemporary scientific investigation. Chapter 12: Apocryphal Revelations. Medieval legends about the true cross suddenly gained new scholarly relevance as researchers searched for historical clues that might help authenticate the Jerusalem discovery. The legend of the true cross, popularized in medieval art and literature, traced the cross's wood back through biblical history to the Tree of Knowledge in the Garden of Eden, creating an elaborate mythology that connected Jesus' crucifixion to humanity's original fall from grace. According to these legends, the wood that became Jesus' cross had previously served as the beam in Solomon's temple, been preserved through the Babylonian exile, and was waiting in Jerusalem when Roman carpenters needed timber for crucifixion crosses. While obviously mythological, some historians wondered whether these stories preserved authentic traditions about the cross's fate after the crucifixion that might be verified through archaeological investigation. Ethiopian Orthodox traditions maintained unique manuscripts describing the cross's journey to Africa, where it allegedly remained hidden for centuries before being discovered by early Ethiopian Christians. The Kebra Nagast, or Glory of the Kings, contains detailed descriptions of the true cross's appearance and miraculous properties that some researchers began comparing with characteristics of the Jerusalem discovery. The Gelasian Decrees list of apocryphal texts included several documents specifically about the cross that had been lost for over a millennium. Vatican librarians began searching their archives for any surviving fragments of these suppressed texts, hoping they might contain historical details about the cross's preservation that could help verify the current discovery's authenticity. Particularly intriguing were Islamic apocryphal texts that describe Jesus' crucifixion differently from both canonical Christian accounts and Orthodox Islamic teachings. Some of these documents suggested that Jesus survived the crucifixion and that his followers carefully preserved the cross as evidence of his suffering. If authentic, the Jerusalem discovery might support these alternative Islamic traditions about Jesus' fate. Armenian Christian manuscripts preserved legends about the cross being divided into multiple pieces immediately after the crucifixion, with different fragments hidden in various locations throughout the Roman Empire. These traditions suggested that Helena's 4th century discovery might have been just one piece of a larger artifact, raising questions about whether other authentic cross fragments might still be hidden in locations described by apocryphal literature. The most mysterious apocryphal references involved prophecies about the cross's rediscovery in the last days before Christ's return. Several medieval texts predicted that the true cross would be revealed when humanity most needed proof of divine love, leading some believers to interpret the current discovery as fulfillment of ancient prophecy and a sign of approaching eschatological events. Chapter 13. The Qumran Connection. Dead Sea Scrolls. Scholars immediately began investigating potential connections between the cross discovery and the 1st century Jewish sectarian community at Qumran. The Essenes, who copied and preserved the scrolls found near the Dead Sea, lived during the same period as Jesus and maintained complex relationships with other Jewish groups in Palestine, including early Christian communities. Dr. James Murphy, director of the Dead Sea Scrolls Digital Library, noted that several unpublished scroll fragments contained references to wooden execution devices that hadn't received scholarly attention because they didn't seem directly relevant to understanding Essene beliefs. The cross discovery prompted new analysis of these fragments, which described crucifixion practices in 1st century Palestine with details that closely matched archaeological evidence from the Jerusalem find. The community rule scrolls' descriptions of ritual purification procedures included specific instructions for handling objects contaminated by death, which some scholars interpreted as potentially relevant to understanding how early Jewish Christians might have preserved Jesus' cross despite religious prohibitions against contact with execution devices. The Essenes' elaborate purity regulations suggested they had developed sophisticated methods for sanctifying contaminated objects. Previously untranslated fragments from Cave 4 at Qumran contained what appeared to be eyewitness accounts of crucifixions in Jerusalem during the Roman occupation. These texts described the construction and placement of crosses in ways that corresponded remarkably with physical evidence from the discovered artifact, suggesting that Essene observers had documented crucifixion practices with surprising accuracy. The War Scrolls' prophecies about the final battle between good and evil included references to a wood of victory that would be revealed when the sons of light triumph over the sons of darkness. Some researchers wondered whether this might be a coded reference to the cross, and whether Essene prophecies had anticipated its eventual rediscovery as a sign of approaching divine judgment. Archaeological connections between Qumran and 1st century Jerusalem revealed regular contact between the Essene community and urban Jewish groups, including followers of Jesus. Pottery, coins, and textile fragments found at both locations suggested active trade and communication networks that could have facilitated the preservation and hiding of significant artifacts like the cross. The most intriguing possibility involved the Copper Scrolls' detailed lists of hidden treasures throughout Palestine. While most scholars interpreted these as references to temple treasures hidden during the Roman siege of Jerusalem, some researchers began wondering whether the scroll might also describe the locations of hidden religious artifacts, potentially including Jesus' cross or other early Christian relics preserved by sympathetic Jewish communities. Chapter 14. Comparative crucifixion studies. Religious studies, scholars began examining crucifixion symbolism across world religions, discovering unexpected parallels that provided new contexts for understanding the cross discovery's global significance. The Norse myth of Odin hanging from Yggdrasil, the world tree, for 9 days and nights to gain wisdom through suffering, contained striking similarities to Christian crucifixion narratives, suggesting that sacrificial death and resurrection might represent universal human spiritual archetypes. Hindu traditions included numerous stories of divine beings willingly accepting suffering and death to benefit humanity, from Krishna's death by arrow to various avatars who sacrificed themselves for cosmic balance. Dr. Rajesh Khurana, professor of comparative mythology at the University of Delhi, noted that Jesus' crucifixion fit patterns found in sacred literature across cultures, suggesting that the cross might resonate with spiritual seekers, regardless of their religious backgrounds. Buddhist accounts of the Buddha's previous lives, recorded in the Jataka tales, included numerous stories of the future Buddha sacrificing his life to save others, often involving trees or wooden structures. Some Buddhist scholars suggested that the cross discovery might provide opportunities for interfaith dialogue about shared understanding of enlightenment through embracing rather than avoiding suffering. Ancient Egyptian mythology's emphasis on death and resurrection, particularly the Osiris cycle, offered another comparative framework for understanding crucifixion symbolism. The preservation of Osiris's body parts across Egypt paralleled Christian traditions about cross fragments being distributed throughout the Roman Empire, suggesting that relic preservation might reflect deep human psychological needs for physical connection to divine sacrifice. Native American spiritual traditions included numerous ceremonial practices involving sacred poles and ritual sacrifices that bore surprising similarities to crucifixion symbolism. Some tribal elders noted that the cross shape appeared in their traditional medicine wheels and directional ceremonies, representing the intersection of earthly and spiritual dimensions in ways that resonated with Christian interpretations. Shamanic traditions worldwide involved practices of symbolic death and rebirth, often associated with sacred trees or wooden structures. Anthropologists studying these parallels suggested that the cross's power might derive from its activation of universal human archetypes about transformation through suffering, making it meaningful even to people outside Christian cultural contexts. The most surprising connections emerged from archaeological studies of prehistoric ritual sites, where wooden posts arranged in cross patterns had been used for ceremonial purposes thousands of years before Christianity. These discoveries suggested that the cross shape might represent fundamental human spiritual intuitions about the relationship between suffering, sacrifice, and transcendence that preceded and prepared the world for Christian revelation. Chapter 15: The Heretical Interpretations. The cross discovery energized various controversial religious movements that had historically challenged orthodox Christian interpretations of the crucifixion. Jehovah's Witnesses, who had long argued that Jesus died on an upright stake rather than a traditional cross, found themselves in the awkward position of potentially being contradicted by archaeological evidence. Some witness scholars argued that the discovery, if authentic, might actually support their teachings by revealing construction details that differed from traditional cross depictions. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints faced questions about how the cross discovery related to their unique teachings about Jesus' ministry in the Americas after his resurrection. Some Mormon scholars suggested that authentication of the Jerusalem cross might actually validate their beliefs about Jesus' survival and continued ministry, while others worried that physical evidence of death might challenge their theological interpretations. Christian identity movements attempted to co-opt the discovery for their racist ideologies, claiming that the cross's discovery in Jerusalem validated their beliefs about Jesus being Aryan rather than Jewish. Mainstream scholars and religious leaders quickly condemned these interpretations, emphasizing that archaeological evidence actually confirmed Jesus' Jewish identity and the Palestinian context of early Christianity. Liberation theology proponents saw the cross discovery as validation of their emphasis on Jesus' identification with the oppressed and marginalized. They argued that physical evidence of Roman crucifixion highlighted the political dimensions of Jesus' execution and supported their interpretation of Christianity as fundamentally concerned with social justice and resistance to oppressive power structures. Prosperity gospel preachers faced theological challenges in incorporating the cross discovery into their teachings about God's desire for believers' material success. Some attempted to argue that the cross's preservation demonstrated God's blessing on Christian faith, while others struggled to reconcile physical evidence of Jesus' suffering with their emphasis on divine prosperity for faithful believers. Rastafarian communities, who revere Jesus as Jah incarnate while rejecting traditional Christian interpretations of crucifixion, offered unique perspectives on the discovery. Some Rastafarians suggested that the cross represented evidence of Babylon's persecution of divine truth, while others saw opportunities for dialogue with Christian communities about shared reverence for Jesus, despite theological differences. The most controversial interpretations came from various New Age and occult movements that claimed the cross possessed mystical properties or encoded secret knowledge. While lacking scholarly support, these interpretations attracted significant online followings and raised questions about how archaeological discoveries might be misappropriated by groups seeking to validate non-historical beliefs about ancient mysteries and hidden spiritual powers. Chapter 16: Artificial Intelligence and Faith. The cross discovery became a test case for artificial intelligence systems trained to analyze religious and historical questions. Advanced AI algorithms processed millions of documents, archaeological reports, and scholarly articles about crucifixion practices, cross veneration, and relic authentication within hours of the discovery announcement. The results challenged both human experts and believers to consider new possibilities for understanding faith in the digital age. Machine learning systems trained on historical data calculated probability ranges for the cross's authenticity that fell within margins that neither fully confirmed nor definitively disproved its identity as Jesus' execution device. IBM's Watson, when queried about the discovery, provided probability assessments based on carbon dating accuracy, DNA preservation likelihood, and historical precedents for relic survival that offered more nuanced analyses than many human experts could produce. Google's AI systems began generating virtual reality reconstructions of first-century Jerusalem crucifixion sites using archaeological data, historical texts, and the physical characteristics of the discovered cross. These simulations allowed viewers to experience historically accurate representations of the crucifixion context, raising questions about whether digital pilgrimage might supplement or replace traditional religious practices. Religious chatbots and AI assistants found themselves fielding millions of questions about the cross discovery from believers seeking spiritual guidance. Some AI systems, trained on theological texts from multiple denominations, provided responses that reflected the diversity of Christian interpretations, while others struggled to address faith-based questions that required spiritual rather than purely analytical responses. The most intriguing developments involved AI systems beginning to generate original theological interpretations of the cross discovery that hadn't occurred to human scholars. Machine learning algorithms, processing vast databases of religious literature, identified patterns and connections that suggested new frameworks for understanding the relationship between physical evidence and spiritual faith. Ethical concerns emerged about AI involvement in religious authentication processes. Some faith communities worried that relying on artificial intelligence to verify sacred artifacts might diminish the role of spiritual discernment and religious authority in determining authenticity. Others argued that AI's lack of religious bias might actually provide more objective analysis than human experts with denominational commitments. The Vatican announced plans to develop AI systems specifically designed to assist in relic authentication while respecting Catholic theological principles. These systems would combine scientific analysis with church teaching to provide guidance for evaluating religious artifacts without replacing human spiritual discernments with purely algorithmic decision-making. Chapter 17: Biotechnology and the Sacred. Advanced DNA sequencing techniques applied to microscopic blood traces on the cross opened unprecedented possibilities for genetic analysis that both thrilled and horrified religious communities worldwide. The Human Genome Project's successor technologies could potentially extract complete genetic profiles from the ancient blood samples, raising profound ethical questions about analyzing what believers considered the DNA of the Son of God. Bioethics committees at major universities and research institutions convened emergency sessions to establish protocols for genetic analysis of the cross samples. The questions they faced had no precedent in human history. Did humanity have the right to sequence the genome of Jesus Christ? What if the DNA revealed unexpected characteristics or genetic markers that challenged traditional beliefs about Jesus' nature? Several biotechnology companies quietly began developing proposals for comprehensive genetic analysis that could potentially reveal Jesus' physical appearance, health status, and even genetic relationships to other individuals. The possibility of using genetic genealogy techniques to trace Jesus' bloodline through modern populations created both excitement and terror among different religious groups. The most controversial possibilities involved theoretical applications of genetic material for cloning or other reproductive technologies. While no serious scientists proposed actually attempting to clone Jesus, the mere theoretical possibility generated international religious outcry and calls for immediate legislation preventing any reproductive use of genetic material from religious artifacts. Medical researchers noted that genetic analysis of first-century Palestinian blood samples could provide valuable information about ancient diseases, population genetics, and human evolution. Some argued that the scientific knowledge gained could benefit humanity regardless of the sample's religious significance, while others maintained that such research would be sacrilegious regardless of potential medical benefits. Forensic genetic analysis revealed blood type, mitochondrial DNA sequences, and other characteristics that could potentially be compared with genetic material from other claimed Jesus relics around the world. The Shroud of Turin, various claimed blood relics, and other artifacts with supposed genetic material could theoretically be cross-referenced to determine consistency or identify fraudulent claims. Religious leaders struggled to develop theological frameworks for understanding genetic analysis of divine incarnation. If Jesus was fully human, did his DNA represent ordinary human genetic material? If he was fully divine, might his genetic code contain supernatural characteristics that would be scientifically detectable? These questions pushed theological thinking into entirely new territory at the intersection of faith and biotechnology. Chapter 18: Global Political Ramifications. The cross discovery immediately became entangled in international diplomacy as world leaders recognized its potential to influence global religious and political dynamics. The United Nations Security Council held emergency sessions to address concerns about increased religious tensions in the Middle East, while the European Union began developing policies for managing pilgrimage traffic to Jerusalem that could overwhelm the region's infrastructure. Israeli Prime Minister's office found itself managing not just an archaeological discovery, but a potential catalyst for regional instability. Christian Zionist communities in the United States intensified their political support for Israel, seeing the cross discovery as divine validation of Jewish restoration to the Holy Land. Simultaneously, Palestinian Christian leaders argued that the cross represented their historical roots in the region and challenged Israeli control over Christian holy sites. The Vatican's diplomatic corps worked frantically to prevent the cross discovery from exacerbating existing tensions between different Christian communities in Jerusalem. Competition between Catholic, Orthodox, and Protestant claims to the artifact threatened to undermine centuries of carefully negotiated agreements about access to Christian holy sites in the Old City. American evangelical political movements interpreted the cross discovery through their end times theological frameworks, with some leaders arguing that it represented a sign of approaching apocalyptic events. This interpretation influenced their political positions on Middle East policy, with increased calls for unconditional support for Israel as preparation for biblical prophecy fulfillment. Russian Orthodox political connections complicated international negotiations about cross-access and study. The Moscow Patriarchate's historical claims to protect Orthodox interests in the Holy Land created diplomatic tensions with Western archaeological teams and raised questions about whether religious politics might interfere with scholarly research. International law struggled to address unprecedented questions about religious artifact ownership and access. The cross discovery revealed gaps in existing UNESCO protocols for managing religious heritage sites and artifacts that belong to global religious communities rather than individual nations. Legal scholars began developing new frameworks for international religious heritage protection. The most significant political ramifications involved potential changes in Middle East peace negotiations. The cross discovery gave Christian communities increased leverage in discussions about Jerusalem's future, while simultaneously providing new focal points for religious nationalism among different groups. Diplomats worried that religious excitement over the cross might undermine secular approaches to regional conflict resolution. Chapter 19: Personal Faith Journeys. Sarah Mitchell had considered herself a casual Christian for most of her adult life, attending church occasionally and believing in God without much theological depth. The cross discovery shattered her comfortable spiritual complacency and forced her to confront fundamental questions about the relationship between faith and evidence that she'd never seriously considered. I realized I didn't know whether I wanted proof of my faith or whether having proof might actually destroy what faith meant to me, she reflected. Dr. Ahmad Rahman, a Muslim physician who had participated in the cross authentication as a forensic expert, found himself unexpectedly moved by the physical evidence of Jesus' suffering. While maintaining his Islamic beliefs about Jesus as a prophet rather than divine, Rahman began incorporating meditation on compassion and sacrifice into his daily prayers. Seeing the blood traces made Jesus' pain real to me in a way that challenged my heart, even if it didn't change my theology, he explained. Father Michael O'Brien, a Catholic priest who had served for 30 years without ever doubting his faith, experienced a crisis when he realized how much his excitement over the cross discovery revealed about his underlying spiritual insecurities. I thought I had solid faith, but my desperate need for this cross to be authentic showed me I'd been running on spiritual fumes for years. The discovery forced me to rebuild my relationship with God from the ground up. Jennifer Kim, a former evangelical who had left Christianity after college, found herself drawn back to exploring faith by the cross discovery. I'd rejected Christianity partly because it seemed to require believing things that couldn't be proven. But when proof actually appeared, I realized my real issues weren't about evidence, but about community, authority, and personal autonomy. The cross made me face those real issues instead of hiding behind intellectual objections. Rabbi David Goldberg used the cross discovery as an opportunity to deepen interfaith relationships in his community while strengthening his own Jewish identity. The cross reminded me that Jesus was one of ours, a Jewish teacher who suffered under Roman occupation. That doesn't make me Christian, but it makes Christianity feel less foreign and threatening. Sometimes understanding differences requires first acknowledging similarities. Maria Santos, a lifelong Catholic from Mexico, experienced the cross discovery as confirmation of her grandmother's faith and the indigenous Catholic traditions that had sustained her family for generations. My abuela always said that God leaves signs for those who need them. The cross appearing now, when so many people doubt everything, feels like God saying our ancestors weren't fools for believing. Their faith was real, and now we have proof. The most profound transformations occurred among people who had experienced religious trauma and found healing through processing the cross discovery. Some survivors of spiritual abuse discovered that physical evidence of Jesus' suffering helped them separate divine love from human religious manipulation, while others found that the cross's authenticity validated their experiences of finding God outside traditional religious institutions.
Chapter 20: The Vanishing.
At 3:17 a.m. Jerusalem time, every security camera monitoring the cross simultaneously went dark for exactly 7 minutes. When the feeds restored, the chamber was empty. No alarms had sounded. No sensors had detected movement. The reinforced steel vault that had housed humanity's most precious archaeological discovery stood open and vacant, as if the cross had simply dissolved into the ancient Palestinian air. The security footage from those missing 7 minutes became the most analyzed video evidence in human history. Digital forensics experts found no signs of tampering, no hidden cuts or edits, no evidence of technical malfunction. The cameras had simply stopped recording, as if responding to a command that bypassed every security protocol designed to prevent exactly this scenario. Israeli intelligence services launched the most intensive investigation in the nation's history, mobilizing resources typically reserved for nuclear security threats. Every person who had accessed the site was questioned, polygraphed, and monitored. International criminal.